والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
لا سيما بقية الله في الأراضين الإمام الثاني عشر صلوات الله عليه وجعلنا الله وإياكم من خير أنصاره وأعوانه محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers, we reached the sixth night, alhamdulillah ta'ala. And there's a question by some of the brothers that asked me that the topics I'm presenting are meant for an older age. And yes, my response to you would be that the topics I've chosen are meant for ages between 15 and up. And inshallah ta'ala, the children would have their own separate program beginning, I believe, today. So please bear with me on that. So we're trying to benefit the older youth as well. Brothers, one of the most crucial and significant topics of the time, we all know, and we spoke about in previous lectures, about the societal challenges that we are facing nowadays. And we spoke about several ways of building that immunity against these social challenges. One of the things that has a very detrimental effect on our belief system is the atheistic point of view and the atheistic argument. We live in a time where there are atheists that live within us, whether at school, whether university, whether for those who work in our jobs. And they simply ask us this question of what evidence do you provide for the existence of God? For those who were there yesterday in the Q&A, we brought about this topic and we superficially discussed some of the evidences we have for the existence of Allah Ta'ala. But today I want to present a specific matter pertaining to this. So please give me your attention for a moment. There is a biologist named Dr. Richard Dawkins. Some of you may have heard of his name. He wrote several books regarding his atheistic point of view and his support to the theory of evolution, which we will discuss tomorrow. But one of his books, which is called The God Delusion, which I've read and scrutinized, I noticed that the book contained a lot of deception to the reader. Although he wrote it and it contained a lot of experiments, a lot of research, that being said, I did notice a lot of deception in that. You might ask me, what kind of deception did you see there? Before I discuss deception, he used complex wording and rhetoric to try to prove his points. He tried to use complex terminologies to deliver to the person that's hearing or reading that this is the reality. And this is something that's not accepted, because today I can come and I can take some complex words and try to prove that Yazid was right in his killing Imam Hussein, just through using complex wording. Will complex wording and terminologies be enough to substantiate what Yazid did? Indeed, no. That's one. And that's why I don't recommend for those, unless it's for the purpose of education, to read the book, which is the God Delusion. Now, you might ask me, well, what did he present in his book that you didn't like and you saw that it contained much deception? He presented something known as the God of the Gaps, which is translated to Arabic as Ilahi Faragat. Basically, what he said in his theory is that since the primitive of times, since the beginning of time, there were so many things and phenomena that we didn't understand. Back then, we didn't know how the sun came about, how the moon came about. Is the earth flat or not? Is it rotating? Is it moving? We didn't have answers to these questions. This is his argument. So he said, as a result to this, we try to make arguments to explain these phenomena. And the most ignorant argument we came up with is the existence of God. So he called that God of the gaps. So we have gaps in our understandings, we have gaps in our knowledge, and we use God as a means to fill these gaps. This is the argument presented in Richard Dawkins' book. And when he said, building upon this, he said, as knowledge ascends, as scientific experimentism ascends and develops, the gaps would become smaller. And as we develop in knowledge, as we have more tools, more instruments, as our mindset and our intellectuality ascends, the more we're going to discover things, the more the gaps would be smaller. To give an example, before we didn't know, for example, what the sun is made from, whether the sun is in the center or whether the earth is in the center. And we said it's God that did this. Now we know what the sun is made up from. We know that, for example, all of the planets are revolving around the sun. So now we know something more, so the gap is less. So now we have an explanation. And so the argument presents this formula. The more knowledge we establish, the lesser the gap. And so in the upcoming years, maybe thousands of years from today, the gaps would be very small, resulting in the unneed for God, for the rejection of God. This is the argument presented by him. Now, how do we respond to this? There are a few ways to respond. A, let's suppose that the gaps have diminished. So there's no gaps anymore. We know everything. We know the explanation to everything based on science. Now we know how the sun operates, the solar system, where we came from, how everything goes about, from the Big Bang until today. We know every single step, how we humans came to be. Was it creationism or evolution? Now we know everything. Okay? The question that we provide or dictate is who tuned these factors in this precise manner. If you do a Google search right now, you would see that the likelihood of what we have arrived to from the Big Bang until the formation of the solar system, until the formation of Earth and Moon and Sun and all of the planets of the solar system, until the formation of all of water on Earth, until the existence of the plants that we use to feed on, until the existence of human. These are a series of millions of complex processes for them to come about through coincidence and chance is impossible. Practically, theoretically not impossible. Based on what they say. Practically impossible. It's like, for example, having 1,000,000 dices. You know a dice? If you roll a dice, you have 6 different numbers. Like one of 6 options. It's like having 1,000,000 of those where you roll them all and you throw them all at the ground, to the ground, and the result is all of the 1,000,000 dices lay on one. What is the likelihood of that? It's not 1 in 1,000,000 because the dice has 6 different numbers.
1 million.
If you do the math, it's very, very complex. It is very complicated. You wouldn't, if somebody would say, the likelihood of the existence to come about is like the likelihood of laying 1,000,000 dices on one at the same time. Would you accept that this could happen? What if they say the Big Bang and the formation of the solar system and the Earth and the Moon and water on Earth and us being and us? You would say, well, that's not even something to discuss. This is in the impossible realm because the digits dictate that. So the complexity we see here dictates that how everything came about is tuned in a specific manner. Has anyone heard of the law of thermodynamics over here? The second law of thermodynamics states that disorder is always prevalent. And when I say disorder, is having something to be in a damaged form is always easier than having something to be in a perfect form. So for example, this phone, if I throw my phone to the ground, the screen would break. It's always easy to break my screen than to fix it. Do you agree?
Yes.
It's always easier, for example, if I have this mic and I go on a building and I let go of the mic. It's gonna scatter, it's gonna damage. It's always easier to put it in a state of disorder than a state of order. This is an established law called the second law of thermodynamics. Now, on naturalism, using this law, how can you explain to me that 1,000,000 of complex factors and 1,000,000 of complex processes came about without a mistake in a specific manner that seems like it was done by purpose? And not, so if we study the whole process from the beginning of creation until now, based on what they say, not based on what we believe, you will see that we don't see any disorder in creation. Now we do see some things like killing and stuff like that, and some genetic mutations that do have an explanation on why they happen. But complexity is prevalent. If there is no entity or no God to guide this process to make them perfect, how do you explain this? How do you explain the law of thermodynamics, which says there is always disorder and disorder is always prevalent? How does that go hand in hand with a series of complexity and complex processes that led us to us humans? This is one thing we can use. And this is something major. The only reason why they ask us such a question is that they rejected reasoning and the laws of logic and reason and intellect. That's why. That's why one of the other scientists, his name is Michael Roos, if you guys want to search him up, for my brothers who are listening. Michael Roos says if Richard Dawkins takes an introductory course in philosophy and logic, he would fail. He would fail. Why is that? Because he has shunned logic and reasoning and grasped onto science. I discussed with my brothers yesterday. If somebody asks you and tells you, can I weigh you, can I check your weight using a ruler? Is that possible?
No.
Why is that not possible? Because a ruler is used to measure the length of something. For example, draw the line, stuff like that. When you want to check your weight, there's a scale for it. So when they come to you and they say, prove to me God exists, using only science, I cannot submit to the methodology that they use. He was born in a Christian family, believing in God. Dr. Anthony Flew grew up, started to doubt that. And then when he reached the late teenager years, he put an X on the no, and he changed the content of his book, and he wrote a book refuting his first book. So his book is called, his new book, There Is a God. And the no is still there with an X on top of it. How did he arrive to such a conclusion? He said, now he's a DNA sequencing scientist. He specializes in the DNA, in the complexity of the DNA, and the sequencing and the biochemical and molecular level of that study. He said, I studied for 60 years and I was a stubborn person trying to prove my point. I arrived to a state where I saw that it is impossible for the DNA to be this complex and to come about through coincidence. There is no way. It is impossible. So the argument of the God of the gaps is an invalid argument. Because I'm not believing in a God just because I don't know the explanation to a certain something. No, I'm believing in God because you and I both agree that there's a starting point to the universe, and I believe in an initiator to the universe. I believe something came out of nothing. You don't believe in that. That is your problem, not mine. That is your problem to deal with. Unless you want to believe in a multiverse, in an infinite universe, infinite universes, which then refutes the law of reasoning. Because you cannot have a regress of dependent factors. Do you want to hear what your Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, said in his first sermon about God? About Allah Ta'ala? Listen to this. 1400 years ago, it's something like even the translation of the words in English don't preserve all the meanings and the precise meaning that is presented in Arabic. He says, Imam Ali alayhi salam, regarding Allah Ta'ala, he says, He is a being, but not through phenomena of coming into being. So, he's a being, but not a being like us that came once into being. He was always a being. He was always there. He exists, but not from non-existence. So, he always existed. It wasn't that he was in a non-existent state, and that shifted to Him existing. He is with everything but not in physical nearness. Some people ask and say, in the Quran and in the Hadith, we know that Allah is with you always. But where is He with you? Like, is He next to me? That is not what's meant. He is with you, but not in a physical state, because God is not a physical matter. Allah Ta'ala is beyond that. This is said 1400 years ago, after the era of ignorance. He is different from everything, but not in a physical separation. Allah Ta'ala is different from us. But when we say Allah is different from us, we don't mean He is different as a means of comparison. So for example, sometimes you say, this iPhone is different from this Samsung. You are establishing that there is a difference, but you are using comparison to establish that there is a difference. Is that clear? You are using a comparison. You are saying this phone is different than this phone. You are saying that it's different, but you are making a comparison. When we say Allah is different than us, His being is different than us, we're not saying it in a sense where we're trying to compare. He's beyond and above. He acts, but without connotation of movement and instruments. He sees even when there is none to be looked at from amongst His creation. Deep words, very hard to explain them, I know. And then He says, He is only one, such that there is none with whom He may keep company, or whom He may miss in His absence. Look at this deep description. And then you have someone like Bertrand Russell, who tries to make fun of this idea of the existence of God, and say, the belief in God, or like he makes an analogy, saying believing in God is like saying there is a china teapot between the moon and the earth. Proving God is like proving that idea. I'm not sure if he paid attention to the fact that a teapot, there is no standard and there is no foundation for me to build my idea upon it. When I'm saying there is Allah, there is a God, there is a creator, there is an initiator, I am saying that from what foundation, from what platform? From the idea that there was a start to this. That there was a beginning to everything. For me, if I see that there is a beginning for something, I would believe that there is an initiator to this beginning. One that caused that. We have to have that's profound belief in Allah. Do you know what our Imam, the commander of the faithful, the leader of the pious, and the head of the mu'mineen, do you know what he said? He said, if there is a way, there isn't, but if there is a way for me to see God, if my eyes become uncovered, unfolded, and I see God, I would have not gained more certainty. Basically, me not seeing God and me seeing God for me is the same thing. My belief, if I see Him, would not increase, taking into consideration that if I were to be able to see Him, which is not possible, because God is not classified as something that can be seen with the eyes, rather with the hearts. Now, some of you might ask, we're in Muharram right now. Why do you bring the topic of believing in God? Something that's foreign to these days. And the answer is, it's actually, now is the time to speak about it. Do you know why? Why did Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam sacrifice himself and his family? For what? For what reason? Exactly, Islam. What in Islam? The teachings, the pillars of Islam. If we compare our belief in God to the belief of other religions and other sects, you may laugh right now, but there are people that believe in things that we see every single day as God. Last time I saw something on Facebook, I'm not sure how authentic this is to mention it right now, but I'm going to be mentioning it. There's a village in India where people were worshipping Donald Trump. They had a picture of him in their room and they were worshipping him. And they announced that on the news. They were actually worshipping him as a god. Trust me, if it wasn't for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we would have been amongst those and there would have been somebody else in here and laughing on us. Imam al-Hussein sacrificed himself. The ashab of Imam al-Hussein sacrificed themselves to preserve the main teachings of Islam. We say, oh, Imam al-Hussein sacrificed himself. We say that a lot. But we have to talk about what did he really sacrifice himself for? What in Islam? The name of Islam? The power of Islam? The teachings? The moral virtues within Islam? The Tawheed, the Nubuwwah? Imam al-Hussein, indeed, he sacrificed himself to put a scar and a point on history for us to remember that there was a man who was the grandson of the Prophet. He came with 77 against thousands and fought a battle that he knew it was to the advantage of the enemy and that he will be killed, but he's going to win the war. He's going to lose the battle, but he's going to win the war. Today, millions of people visit Imam al-Hussein, but the enemies of Imam al-Hussein, even the lovers of the enemies of Imam al-Hussein don't even visit them. Who visits Yazid today? Who visits Muawiyah today? Who visits these unjust so-called caliphates? Nobody visits them. Even those that like them don't visit them anymore. Myself and yourself must establish and use the proper means to know Imam al-Hussein and to know his teaching. Take this opportunity of Muharram and every other Muharram coming, not to just come here, have fun, spend time, see friends, drink tea, drink lemon tea, eat food. No. Come here to know the true essence of this lesson. Come here and leave and have a difference. You today must be different than you yesterday. You must have acquired something different. Today you have to go home, and if your parents ask you, what did you learn today? You have to have an answer. If you say, I don't know what I learned today, then that's a problem. You're coming here and wasting time. And this is a lesson for me first, and to my young brothers. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman, alayhi afdalu salatu wa salam, and to help us to be established as one of the close companions of him, and to be with him. This is a very good dua to always dictate. I ask Allah to be with Imam al-Mahdi at the time that he takes revenge from the enemies of Imam al-Hussein. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وصلى الله على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
Muhammad.